Well, recently I made a video about the Japanese election results, and in that, I mentioned how US-Japan relations could get pretty sour if there's no trade deal between the two countries. And guess what? Just a few hours ago, President Trump announced that the US has signed a historic trade deal with Japan.
I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan. And that was done with Japan. They had their top people here, and we worked on it long and hard, and it's a great deal for everybody.
So, in today's video, we're going to talk about this massive new trade deal between the United States and Japan, a deal that President Trump is calling perhaps the largest deal ever made. Now, of course, he says that about a lot of things, but honestly, this one is a big deal, especially for industries like cars, rice, and even semiconductors. Now, if you look at Asia, Japan is easily one of the most important countries in the region. After World War II, US-Japan relations became very strong. And since then, both countries have grown a lot. Japanese people have a lot of respect for America, and Americans genuinely love Japanese culture, from sushi to their way of living, and so much more. But as you know, to maintain a stable and developed nation, a strong economy and finance system are essential. For decades, both the US and Japan have had some of the largest GDPs in the world. Sure, the US is now far ahead, but Japan's GDP is still massive, especially considering their smaller population and the frequent earthquakes they face. Now here's the issue. Whenever the US and Japan trade, it's rarely balanced. Japan always manages to sell more to the US than the US sells to Japan. Just take a look at this table. The US runs around a $69 billion trade deficit with Japan. Japan sells a lot of stuff to America: cars, trucks, auto parts. You see Japanese brand cars all over the US. Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Lexus, all Japanese. Sony cameras are super popular, and they also export medical equipment, industrial machines, seafood like tuna. The list goes on. So yeah, the US is a huge market for Japan. And honestly, Americans love Japanese products. But now, President Trump has struck a massive new trade deal with Japan, and it's definitely a win for the US government. Under this deal, the US has agreed to put a 15% tariff on Japanese goods, which is lower than the 25% Trump had originally threatened. In return, Japan will open its markets to more American products, especially cars and trucks, American rice, and other agricultural goods. So yeah, it's a give-and-take kind of deal. Now, how does this benefit the US? First off, American agriculture gets a big boost. Japan will increase its purchase of US rice, which is huge for American rice farmers. Same goes for wheat, corn, soybeans. All of that's going to benefit. And US cars will get better access to the Japanese market. Now, let me say this. Japan's auto industry is super competitive, but there's definitely a niche. In Japan, a lot of people are into motorcycles, and for many, a Harley-Davidson is like a dream bike. With this deal, US cars and bikes could get more visibility in Japan, and that's a big boost to American auto manufacturers. Also, with Japan's growing interest in EVs and autonomous vehicles, this deal could give US companies a huge advantage, since America is a leader in those sectors. Other than that, the US could sell more heavy machinery, like construction and farm equipment, to Japan. Medical equipment is another one. Japan has a very advanced healthcare system, and there's high demand for quality medical devices. And let's not forget IT products and electronics. Japan's tech-savvy population could be a great market for US innovation. So yeah, there's a lot the US can sell to Japan, which means more exports and a boost to the US economy. That said, not everyone's convinced this deal will help US car manufacturers as much as it promises. Some critics say Japan might still prefer their own brands, which, let's be honest, are already deeply rooted in their market. So we'll have to wait and see whether Japanese consumers actually switch to American products or stick to their homegrown favorites. Now, aside from imports and exports, President Trump also announced that Japan will invest $550 billion in the U.S. economy.
This is not traditional investment. This isn't like the government saying, oh, Toyota is going to invest in America. This is literally the government of Japan giving Donald Trump and the American people $550 billion to invest at his direction on things that are important to America and national security.
He didn't give a lot of details, but it looks like the focus will be on semiconductors, shipbuilding, AI, and energy. If this investment really goes through, it could create thousands of new jobs in the U.S. across several industries. Plus, it helps the U.S. strengthen its position in Asia by locking in a deal with one of its most important allies. And what does Japan get out of this? Their biggest win is in the auto sector. Japanese car makers like Toyota, Honda, and Subaru rely heavily on the American market, and instead of facing 25% tariffs, now they'll only face 15%. So yeah, they're definitely breathing a sigh of relief. Also, the deal includes Japan entering a joint venture for LNG, liquefied natural gas, exports in Alaska. It involves building an 800-mile pipeline to transport natural gas from the North Slope to a liquefaction plant in Nikiski for export. Estimated cost? Around $44 billion, a massive project. This Alaska LNG project could be a game-changer for Japan's energy security, especially with all the concerns about China's Belt and Road Initiative. It gives Japan a strategic energy option outside of Chinese influence. So yeah, overall, this trade deal between the U.S. and Japan is looking good on paper. But let's be clear, the future of U.S.-Japan relations is still a bit shaky. For example, the current deal doesn't remove the 50% tariffs on Japanese steel and aluminum. It also says nothing about defense spending. On top of that, Japan's Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, recently lost the upper house elections, and there's growing pressure for him to resign. If a new leader comes in, they might take a very different approach that the U.S. doesn't like. And let's not forget, President Trump could still ask Japan for more protection money. He might also pressure Japan to take a military stance against China if Taiwan's situation escalates. Plus, if his mood shifts, tariffs could go up again. So yeah, this is a good trade deal, and the U.S. has also signed trade agreements with other Asian nations like Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. That's a strong sign that U.S. influence is steadily growing in the ASEAN region. But it'll be really interesting to see if the U.S. can manage to strike a trade deal with either India or China, because these two countries are absolute giants when it comes to population and GDP. A trade agreement with either of them would be far more impactful and beneficial for the U.S. economy. Just think about it. India and China together make up around 35% to 37% of the world's population. That's a massive consumer base. The U.S. could potentially sell a lot to these markets. Of course, dealing with China is tricky with all the political tension and economic rivalry. But India could be a game-changing market for U.S. exporters. American influence in India is already growing fast. People there love U.S. brands, from iPhones and New Balance shoes to Starbucks coffee, and so much more. So if a trade deal ever gets signed with India, it could open the door to enormous opportunities for American businesses. So yeah, while the U.S. might land more trade deals with Asia-based countries, that doesn't mean it'll be smooth sailing forever. Geopolitics can shift, economies can change, and what looks promising today might face roadblocks tomorrow. What do you think about this trade deal? Do you think it'll work out in the long run? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.